Therapist Take, and we're going to talk about scary relationships in the spirit of Halloween, so don't go anywhere. Hey everybody, welcome to Therapist Take, and we are happy to have you here, and this is going to be our very first episode that will be featured on the Therapist Take podcast. And so of course, you'll be able to find that eventually on Apple Podcast and Spotify probably, but it won't be up there for quite a while. So, but if you are listening to this on the podcast, you can join in on these episodes as we record them live, and even participate live through the comments section as we filter through them. And we're happy to have you do that. You can do that through Facebook, in which we'll make sure to put the handle for our Facebook handle up on the screen so you can see that. And you can also do it through YouTube. And so you'll see that come up on your screen here in just a second. And if you are on YouTube, please make sure you subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the bell and do all the shenanigans that everybody says on YouTube, so that the videos can get out there more and we can make those algorithms happy. So. Mm-hmm. But I am here with my colleague and business partner and friend, Carrie Kiger, and we are going to talk about scary relationships. And we thought this was appropriate. Of course, I didn't figure out that, I didn't put it together until we got here that this is connected to Halloween.
Yeah, which is what I thought you would understand right away.
Right. We're so happy that I got why. I'm like, yeah, it's a perfect topic.
You liked it until I explicitly pointed out it was connected to Halloween.
Right. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now. But I think it's a good topic.
It is a good topic.
Right. I think it's one that needs to be discussed because a lot of people are in scary relationships.
Sure.
And of course, we've worked with many clients who are in scary relationships. Mm-hmm. I do think scary relationships is the concept of scary is more of a continuum, right?
Right.
So what would you say would be the extreme?
Toxic, right? I mean, that's the word that we kind of debated today, right? We're talking about toxic relationships, and scary was obviously a nod to Halloween, and scary is more of, a common word to describe, oh, that sounds scary, or, oh, he said what? That sounds scary, right? Just kind of, that would probably be on the low end, right, when we're using the word scary, perhaps. Right. From a clinical perspective, we'd be talking toxic or dangerous, right, on the high end of that continuum.
Yeah, danger definitely comes to mind, which is one of the topics that we're going to talk about. Right. So we are going to address a few different things in a short amount of time here. Which would include identifying these scary relationships and dangerous partners. So kind of identifying that toxicity, basically, in its varying degrees. We're going to talk about how to detox the relationship, basically. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, we're going to talk about managing the emotional aftermath because there's a lot of intensity in in changing the relationship so that it's no longer scary or toxic, right? Yeah. And so it's basically it's kind of coming down from that intensity, and then other emotions kind of show up from that, and they have to be managed.
Absolutely. So, yeah.
So do you want to put a plug in for our sponsor?
I'm so joking. Funny, Josh, right? Yeah. Famous Solutions is the sponsor.
That's right. So let's start with identifying these toxic relationships.
Okay. What scary and toxic?
I'm sorry. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm still stuck on the word.
I know
toxic,
you are.
Right?
I know. Well, you're thinking like a clinician.
Sure.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So what would you if you're working with somebody and you're I think we're kind of always paying attention for this, looking for those cues, just kind of organic for us now at this point. What are you looking for when you're working with someone that's kind of hinting around at this idea that this relationship's kind of scary?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I'm going to say some things that are all going to have intensity levels too, right? So kind of be thinking of them on a continuum, right? But one of the signs that I often am listening for are ways that you have to give up your autonomy in order to be in that relationship, right? Whether that's all of your time, all of your focus, all of your energy, all of you, because a committed relationship is going to have some healthy amount of interdependence, right? Places that you depend on each other and places of separateness and independence. But in a relationship where it's pretty much all about the other person or all about the relationship, and there can't be any autonomy, there can't be any individual identity, that is going to engulf someone, right? And that's dangerous and toxic. Mm-hmm. And you don't just see this in romantic relationships, right? You can definitely see it in parent-child relationships. You can see it sometimes in friendships. But I think we primarily identify it with, a dating or romantic partner.
Right. So you're talking about the all about you thing. It reminds me of gaslighting.
Yeah, sure.
Also got gaslighting on the brain because I just wrote that article about gaslighting, which we should do an episode on.
Sure.
I will make sure to link that in the description of this video so people can see this article that I wrote on the 12 types of gaslighting. But this being in a relationship where they're making it all about them, and then it kind of sets, to me, it kind of establishes a rule system that makes the partner where it's not all about them, their role becomes kind of this nurturer or caretaker, and then their self kind of gets lost or absorbed in that phenomenon. And so there's a very low self-care, and nobody's taking care of them in return. Right. So the give and take definitely isn't there.
Doesn't exist. Sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. And I think gaslighting is part of it. I think, the low end of intensity could be being in a relationship with what I would call maybe a high demand partner. Right. And so you got a high demand partner that's more persnickety, right, or requiring, and the other one's more adaptable and agreeable. And so the shifting and sharing of that mutual caregiving can kind of skew one way. That's not necessarily toxic, but it does have an element of concern, right? Where it becomes scary and toxic is when it is all about that, and or when the high demand partner is using covert or explicit or even not so explicit abusive techniques in order to keep those demands being met. Yeah.
An example being...
Are you asking? Or are you about to tell one? Okay, I couldn't tell if you're getting ready to share one.
No, I'm asking you, what's the example that comes to your mind of that?
I think it's going to look often things like kind of common patterns in relationships: silent treatment, withdrawal, withholding. Oh, you want to do it that way? Fine, right? And then kind of the silent treatment. It can look like, outright criticism. What, you want to do it that way? Well, that's ridiculous, right? It can look like coercion or trying to, just get your way through manipulation. That, that part that comes definitely up the scale of toxic. Chip away at your own individual identities and perspectives. Yeah,
I think something that's important to be clear on is that, there's no relationship where there's a violence that isn't toxic.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, so
sure.
It might sound silly to some people that we have to say that, but for the person that's in it, it's kind of just the way of life, and it just doesn't click with them sometimes that this is really bad, and but I just wanted to kind of make that as a baseline, because what you're talking about is kind of this nonviolent way of kind of coercing people and manipulating, and of course, again, my mind is going back to the gaslighting that's about vulnerability, safety exploitation, basically. And so, and you actually were the one who I kind of identified this for me. So like when I was coming up with that very last 12th, the 12th form of gaslighting that I call the forsaker, was actually something that you brought to my attention in talking about partners that will threaten their presence in the relationship in order to get their way. And so in other words, it's kind of like, who would you be without me? We'll see how well you do if I just leave. I'll just leave, and then we'll see how well you do. and it's kind of establishing like you're nothing without me here, and I'm threatening to forsake you in order to manipulate you back into this toxic or scary way of doing things. So that's kind of what I was thinking of.
Okay.
And you might you were looking at me like you don't remember telling me that, but that actually did.
I don't. I believe you. I don't remember.
Yeah, you
I say so many good things.
I know so many.
Can't track them all.
But you probably came up with all 12 of those, and you don't. And I could just take credit.
You're the one who just wrote them down. Yeah.
But the nonviolence thing, I think, is important too, because for people that are listening to this or watching this, that look, if somebody is throwing things across the room and breaking things, and then and they come in our office or something, and they're like, well, I didn't touch her, or I didn't touch him. Let's not make this just one-sided or just about men to women, but it also happens from women to men. When things are being thrown and the emotional intensity rises to such a degree that it's scary, that's violence.
Yeah, right.
And it's just, you might not be being actually touching that person, but you're generating a type of fear in that person that makes them think that, one false step and then this could be directed at me, basically.
Right. No, and I think that violence is something that I think we intuitively know that's dangerous, right? We know that's not going to work. I think that what we see in the offices is the stuff that's, the whole point of it is more provoking of a question of like, but is that, right? They were very upset, or I just didn't understand what they were saying, and so went that direction. And those kind of questions are legitimate to ask, but oftentimes are also indicators that maybe some way that people's realities are being manipulated. And at the core, I think that you have to trust your gut. And if you find that you're being chipped away at or gaslit over and over and over, and your gut doesn't understand it, that's a big indicator, right? That you're in a scary and perhaps toxic and dangerous relationship.
Yeah, we talk about, paying attention to your gut.
Right. As
kind of being a big step in, changing these dynamics and reclaiming the self and things like that. And of course, the violent stuff, I think, is these are more obvious indicators of toxicity in a relationship. And kind of where we started out on, so we're kind of coming full circle here and backtracking, are these more subtle ways. And so when you pick up on one part in the relationship where it's just everything's kind of orchestrated or constructed around the care and the wants and the desires of one person. There might not be a lot of yelling or emotional abuse or no physical abuse and things like that, but it's just it's alarming.
Yeah.
Right. And somewhat disturbing.
Well, we've all had friends, right, that you start getting in relationships and they kind of disappear. Sure. Right. And you say, well, why are you always with the other's friends? And why don't we see you anymore? And those are the things that aren't necessarily dangerous, but they create, this is kind of scary. I haven't seen you in a year since you started dating that person. Yeah. Right. And so, again, just indicators, kind of like what you're noticing here, Josh, not all the way as obvious.
And I think kind of to piggyback on that with what I see, or kind of one thing I look for is kind of like a robotic response. And so certain keywords or certain, combination of words and feelings in whatever context they're in, and then outcomes, just kind of the response, just this pre-programmed response. And one thing I think of, and I've told you this story before, is, my wife and I, we have, when our daughter was born, and she's our baby, she's not a baby anymore, but she is the last one. She's the baby. And we were like, we're not going to have a baby. Like, we don't want our child to be a baby. Like, we're not going to be those parents. And so we were like really intentional about like, hey, we're not going to give her stuff when she just whines and cries. But then a couple of things happened. One is that we couldn't be around all the time when she's with the older boys. and they could care less about what happens to her when she's grown, what kind of person she grows into.
That's right.
And so they're like, they just want her to shut up. And so they'll give her whatever she wants just to get her, to keep her quiet when we're not around. And so that effect is still happening. Right. But then I think like there's just this built-in motherly instinct to just care for your kid, you know, and I would come home or walk in the kitchen or something, and my daughters asked my wife, like, can you make me a PB&J? And she is more than capable of making a PB&J. And my wife is in there making it, but like it's like her body's willfully doing this and her face is begrudgingly doing this. And I'm like, you know, babe, you know she can make that herself. And then that revelation hits her, like it knocks her out of the trance, and she's like, she asked me, my body just does it. You know, it's just automatic, you know. And then she catches herself halfway through and she's frustrated, like, I should have made her, you know, make this sandwich, you know. But I think that's that programming, you know, that's really hard to combat. And I think, you know, in these scary relationships, a lot of times I do think it's more one partner over the other. Every now and then you'll get two people that are just, both of them are scary.
Sure.
Right. And I think that this one partner is able to, whether it's conscious or subconscious, I hope it's subconscious. If it's conscious, we're talking about a different type of scary.
Yes.
But, you know, kind of subconsciously hones in on this programming and takes advantage of it, basically.
Yeah. Sure. Exploits it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if it's a little kid.
The little kids are great at exploiting our
I know
pre-programming as parents.
It's true.
You know,
but I think too that you're also kind of going to another aspect, right, of some scary relationships, and that's how intense is your conflict, right? I mean, conflict by nature, just the word conflict is intense, right?
Yeah.
But I think that conflict that escalates beyond your control, right? Conflict where you'll find yourself or you're over and over saying, oh my gosh, I'm just not that kind of person. But in that moment, I acted like that, right?
Right.
I think that's another scary aspect, right? Being in a relationship that brings out a part of you that really goes against your value system. And when you're in that conflict that you feel consistently out of control.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, and that gets me thinking about just kind of I just picture a partner looking in the mirror and just kind of going, who are you? You know, and it seems like, you know, I don't know if this is just, you know, a post, you know, pandemic effect or whatever. It just seems like a lot lately. I've heard so many people tell me, I used to like me, you know, and I used to know me. I used to like me, and I don't even know where I went, you know, and what happened, you know. And there's just, then, you know, from there we're partaking on this journey of self-discovery or self-rediscovery or something to that effect. And so I think that's a way to, like, you know, are you in a scary relationship? Like, are you looking in a mirror and just not even recognizing the person looking back at you anymore?
Yeah.
And it's connected to this relationship that you're.
Sure. And I think that also can look often like kind of a little of what you already said, though. The idea of people will say, like, I've just frozen. Like, I just don't even respond. I don't even notice. And sometimes that's an adaptable skill, right? Like not reacting to every kid's screaming fit around wanting a cookie when they're 3. But over time it can, when you're especially in a adult parent-child relationship or a romantic dating relationship, when you find that you're having to check out and you're frozen and you're automated, that's another indicator that perhaps you're in a scary space, that your body and brain are autopiloting you for safety, right? And that's maybe often when people look in the mirror and say things like you're saying, who is this person that just got railroaded by their partner and doesn't even notice it, right? That just is cool with no one asking them about how things are going or et cetera, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good opportunity to get into the next part. But before we do that, I just want to plug, because I'm thinking about John Gottman's book, The 7 Principles for
Making Marriage Work.
Making a Marriage Work. That's what it is. I'll make sure to put a link to that too for people. But in that book, he identifies the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? So if you're really looking for kind of a progression of toxicity relationally, when you see these 4 horsemen, that's it should be raising alarm.
Right.
I can't remember what the first one is. I know defensiveness, and then there's resentment.
Stonewalling.
Oh, stonewalling. That's what it's. Defensiveness, resentment, stonewalling, and contempt.
And contempt is when he says basically the relationship has jumped the shark, right?
Yeah, contempt is really scary for the survival of the relationship.
Right.
It's you feel contempt for somebody. It's at least from the research. I don't want people to think that they're just going to be a statistic. It's not like you can't come back from that. And the concept is, in terms of measuring this, is ambiguous.
Of course. And even the experience of contempt, right?
Right.
What does that mean? Thinking sometimes that your partner is ridiculous.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. But I think still that his research is pretty profound and pretty darn great, right, at predicting. So the whole idea is that you don't want to get to a place where that's the place that you feel when we're checking in about your relationship. That's very scary, particularly to experience, but for the outcome of the relationship.
Right. So in these scary relationships, where different levels of toxicity have been identified, how do we detox it? How do we detox it? That is the next question, or the next thing we're going to talk about.
And detox is a good word, right? Because the idea that it's a process.
You're right. Yeah. That's
right. You got to get away, and you got to know that you're going to go through some things. Yeah. It's not a one phase in or out. Yeah. Stop it.
You can't go take a bath and drop a bath bomb in the tub, and then you get out and it's all
leached
better.
from you.
If someone ever comes up with that, let me know.
Yeah, you bet.
That'd be wonderful.
$1 billion idea.
Right. Side note, I like bath bombs.
Yeah, I know.
I really do.
I know.
But anyways,
I know.
We can talk
I like the
about
way
that
they make the
episode.
whole bathroom smell good.
I know.
Yeah.
Like I like how I don't even know if it really. I think it's just more psychological for me. It's like
I'll take it.
I just put something in this water that's gonna
make me feel
good
better.
For me.
Right. Smells good, so it's got to be good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gotta be. And it's like, even though it looks like you just dropped something nuclear.
I know.
In
the
your
fizzing. Yeah. I know. It could be concerning. I remember when my kids were the first time doing it, the fuzz, the buzzing and the fuzzing and all that. Fizzing.
I know.
It's interesting, right? Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, we digress there.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, back to truly detoxing relationships.
Back to the episode.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to talk about detoxing the relationship. And as we said, it's a process. So ideally... I think ideally is finding a therapist, and on our YouTube channel, some of the comments I get is like, they're like, man, we watched this whole video. It's like, go find a therapist. I was like, but that is the ideal situation, is to find a professional that can help you work through these things.
Sure.
But that's not often realistic for a lot of people.
Sure.
So I think, if we will put links to therapist directories.
Good.
So people can, start searching that out if you haven't already. But I think, when it comes to what comes to my mind right off the cusp of working at detoxing is realizing the value of self. And that's, I've got to find me again. I've got to tend to me, and starting to make efforts to just tend to yourself, even the smallest of things. Like I was turned on to the podcast, the Huberman Labs podcast, for example. Yeah. And the person who told me about it, which without naming names, was one of my clients. And when he came in one day, I just told him thank you, because that podcast there's just little subtle things that I started doing for myself that he would talk about on this podcast, just like turning on the lights in the morning to increase your photon intake so that you can have more energy.
I feel like I told you that, though, Josh.
Did you tell me about that?
I did tell you to do that.
My bad. Let me do a retraction. Thank you, Carrie Kiger.
Well, also, I know that episode, and I agree. But
you listened to that one?
I listened to that one. Yes,
right.
Yes.
Managing sleep habits a little bit better. That was another thing that I did, was just trying to not get on my phone if I wake up in the middle of the night, or things like, there's just little things that you can do that just makes It's just a little effort towards self-care.
Sure.
And I think you just discover a little bit of yourself at a time.
Yeah.
And that's just really empowering.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important because a lot of what this looks like in therapy and even, I mean, individual or couples therapy is that someone will say, oh my gosh, how did I get myself into a relationship like this? Right. How did a lot of the times I'll hear the language, how did I allow this to happen? Right.
Right.
Or we sometimes will ask people, how did you consent to this being created? Right. And those aren't judgmental questions. That is exploration of self that you're talking about. Right. And I think that this is also where accessing awareness of self. And I would say that the next step in that is really accessing self-compassion, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because the road to hell is paved in good intentions.
Right.
But I think it's really important to go ahead and acknowledge that probably how this happened was full of hope and safety seeking and trying to see the best in people or situations. And while that may not have gotten you where you want it to, judging yourself never changes it. Understanding and having... as they say, radical compassion. I always tell my clients that word radical is really important because it means it needs to be beyond your understanding and abilities and a constant state perhaps of striving for radical compassion, right?
Yeah.
And it's not easy to do that, but understanding how did you get in this space with, right, self-awareness and self-compassion.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I believe that if you want to have a true and effective compassion for somebody else, that begins with you having compassion for self.
Sure.
And so I'm not saying that people who have a hard time with that aren't able to be compassionate for others. I just think it's probably more wearing and exhausting,
right,
and more difficult for them. But to have a type of compassion that really makes a difference in other people's lives, it begins with you having compassion for yourself in your situation.
Right.
And that kind of, that sucks in some ways for some people, because some people are in situations where it's like they hear us saying this and they're like, man, that's I've done that. I'm always the one having to take care of stuff.
Sure.
And so what I'm hearing you say, Josh, is
take care of me.
I got to take care of me. And when is it my turn? And I will validate that. Like, it is your turn to be taken care of. And I am sorry to break the news to you, but it's going to have to start with you taking care of you.
It's true. It's a real disappointment.
Yeah,
right?
It sure is.
But it's also the path to empowerment.
Agreed.
Yeah. But I also think that in order sometimes for, just to be pragmatic for a minute, when you say, how do you detox? If you're going to build your self-awareness and self-compassion, you may need some distance from the relationship, from the patterns, from the person, from the places. And, I know that, in a perfect world, we all can't just, hop in our cars to a nice, cozy cabin by ourselves to write and journal and meditate for weeks, right? Yeah. But where can you create some space and some distance so that you can get some perspective, right? Because as we know, right, we say information is found in contrast. And so sometimes you have to give yourself that space to really be able to see, oh, this is what I'm feeling. This is what's going on. This is where it goes off the rails.
Right. And just to kind of illustrate what Carrie's talking about with the information found in contrast, if you have a black statue behind a black background, you might be able to see the outline of, you might know there's a statue there. You might not know there's one there, depending on how dark the room is. But if you put that same black statue behind a white background, you can see all the imperfections. You can see, if there are any, you can see the full outline of it, and you see it very differently, and it's different information now. So that if the artist of the sculptor, feels like there needs to be some corrections made, I would think that they probably wouldn't want to be sculpting a black statue behind a black background. Like, they'd want to be able to see what they need to see to make the changes they need to make. And so that's what Carrie's talking about. Like, when you do something so different, it creates a contrast. Like being in a room when the air conditioning is running the whole time, and then it shuts off, and it gets really quiet, and you're kind of blown away on how loud that room was, and you didn't even notice until it shut off, right?
Sure.
So now we're talking about, like, as you're kind of moving up the scale, I feel
Yeah,
like
that's what I was
in
getting ready to-
managing toxicity, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of getting
Yeah.
into this boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like do you need to get away a little bit? Like, you know, like if we're going to the extreme, you know,
Right.
where there's physical violence, that's a yes, you
Yeah.
do. You know,
Yeah.
safety's priority. But I did a YouTube video on the difference
Yeah.
between ultimatums and non-negotiable boundaries.
Nice.
You know, because a lot of the reluctance to do this work is the response of the partner,
Right.
and it creates some level of disruption. And so it's like there are some boundaries that I have to do for myself, for our relationship, and they're non-negotiable. And then the partner's like, why are you making ultimatums?
Right.
And I'll make sure to put a link. I'm putting lots of links.
I know, to your work
Yeah.
here, Josh, right?
Yeah, I have lots of stuff I did. You guys, please go click on all of it. And so I'll make sure to put a link to that though, but where you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But the message I want to send is that when you're setting a boundary for the well-being of yourself and therefore the well-being of the relationships that you're in, that's not an ultimatum. Like an ultimatum is really punitive. It's like, you do this or else I'll do this.
Right.
You know, where when you're talking about self-care, like it's boundaries.
Yeah.
And so
And boundaries are set to have a healthy relationship. They're to ensure nurturance and safety.
right.
Which I think that's also kind of what you're saying about moving up the scale. Regardless of the threat to your physical safety, part of this detox is getting to safety. You have to have safety in a relationship in order to move forward. You can't be a connected human being if you don't feel safe, right?
Sure.
Even if it's this somewhat minimizing ability to kind of compartmentalize and put it away.
Right.
If you really are trying to say, let's avoid these scary relationships, that requires awareness and connection. And so if you feel unsafe with somebody emotionally or physically, then it's your body and your gut is really telling you this isn't a good idea. And so the idea of detox is to get some distance, perhaps establish some boundaries so that you can know the difference.
Right. Yeah. Let me ask you a question, because I have been thinking very strongly about this concept of safety. You know, like when it comes to emotional safety, like there's no, we're assuming there's no physical danger.
Okay.
Right. And so there's no danger there, right? It's emotional safety. You know, it's a feelings safety.
Sure.
So what's happening in our brains that makes us feel unsafe, and you know, whose responsibility is it to create that safety? And the reason why I'm saying that is because it's kind of like when people say, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells around my partner all the time. And Josh, could you make them change so that I don't have to walk on eggshells anymore?
Sure.
And I believe that that's a level of emotional safety, right?
Yes, sure.
So I believe that emotional, if you feel like you're walking on eggshells, it's your job to not walk on eggshells. You know, and so the work really is an internal work, but whatever it means to not walk on eggshells, that's what people are afraid of, because how is that going to impact the dynamic that exists between me and my partner?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And of course, things based upon the toxicity of that relationship, things could get physically dangerous.
Right.
And that's something definitely that to be aware of.
Yes.
But for a lot of people we work with that deal with that, they're like, they have no fear whatsoever this person would ever hurt them physically. But yet they feel very unsafe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
sorry, I rambled on it. You tell me what you're thinking.
Well, now I forgot what the original question was, but no, I think that if you're asking whose responsibility is, of course, I'm going to be an annoying therapist and say it's both, right? It's it's the individual's job to say, I claim my feet. I'm not going to walk on eggshells. It's also the relationship's job to invite mutual care and concern. So I think the challenge as far as your individual work is to be able to go to your partner and say things like, hey, you know, whether you like this or understand this completely or not, this is really important to me. And if you're in a less scary relationship,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even lucky enough to be in a semi-healthy relationship, the response of the other person is going to be, okay, I'm willing. I'd like to learn more about that. I'm willing to give that a try or whatever, right? And I think that in scary relationships, that interim period of I'm no longer going to walk on eggshells maybe that's the avoidance of it. Your intuition tells you this could be over.
Sure.
And part of our job with people is to say, maybe it could. Right? Let's embrace that for a minute.
Yeah.
Not advocating one way or the other, but there's always a risk that relationships can end. That's the implicit part of it, right? So let's pull that in. Let's bring that to our awareness again.
Yeah. And I want to give just a brief disclaimer too. I am no way saying in any way, shape, or form that feeling unsafe is all in someone's head.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Not at all.
No.
But just kind of like you said, like there's responsibility. It's going to happen on both parts. But the person who feels unsafe, a lot of it is like identifying what their responsibility is, and then that's going to hold the other person's feet to the fire.
Sure.
And that could be threatening to the relationship.
Yeah,
for sure.
it could.
So.
It could. Well, how do you deal with this once you're done, right?
Yeah.
What's the aftermath?
The emotional aftermath. So emotional aftermath kind of comes from the idea of what we're talking about. Like when changes like this are made, it's often the intuitively knowing that there's going to be aftermath.
Right.
That I think is what keeps people from doing it.
Sure.
And sometimes it's just fear of disruption in general, and sometimes they're afraid they might lose the relationship, and sometimes they might be afraid of on the extreme of like physical violence. Feel like they're with a dangerous person. So that's where I think the bulk of the work comes in, to be honest with you.
Sure. Well, and I think this is where basic but incredibly important things like having a healthy support system and building honest and trustworthy people in your life, that's the whole point of community, right? And loved ones in your life is not the whole point, but a big part of the point, right? Is so that the aftermath, when you need them and those systems, that they're there. And I think that what we do in our work is often invite people to process through those possible risks and scenarios. Because what we don't know feels like, the boogeyman in the closet, or let's open the door and let's turn on the light and let's check it out. So that you can prepare yourself through this process. And again, building that awareness and building that anxiety management tool of what are you running from? What are you avoiding? What are you trying to protect yourself from? And how do we go ahead and pull that to consciousness? And if you need to be safe, let's be safe.
Yeah.
But what are we trying to protect ourselves from?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think pacing yourself, like not rushing the process, and being and that's a form of being kind to yourself.
Absolutely.
In a way. Like,
Compassion.
I don't have to be well all the time. Like I can be a mess.
Yeah.
I can be like regular human beings and be a mess sometimes.
It's kind of like the concept, right? That to be a good parent, it means that you have to wonder if you're being a good parent.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so if you're a well person, sometimes you're like, boy, that's not well. That must mean I'm pretty well.
Right. Yeah. I say it all the time that I believe mental health and relational health are found in paradoxes, and that's a paradox.
That's the paradox,
right?
Sure.
And so, we could spend hours talking about the process but I think those elements, self-care, having a support system, taking it upon yourself if you don't have one, to start developing those, reconnecting with people, having hobbies that you have let slip through, and rediscovering that you like to do certain things, have fun, and you enjoy certain things, and start making a plan for this process. But a big piece of that is to let yourself feel what you feel. Like, just because you're sad does not mean it's not working, Right. And if you push back against that, then you're going to be sad about being sad.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really what depression is. That's what I believe.
Well, I think that, part of going through this from the beginning to the end is just, it's hard. And when things are hard, it's okay to sit down for a minute and say, this is really hard. And in the aftermath to say, I'm still wounded or fatigued or uncertain. And you're changed through this process. And so the aftermath is also, I think, accepting that where you land is somewhere different than where you started, and that kind of inviting that space for flexibility.
Yeah.
Right. Which is really the absolute key to mental health.
Right. Yeah. So we really appreciate everybody who tuned in to listen to this. We didn't get our third camera working, so I was disappointed because I was really wanting to show our Ted Lasso
your new artwork
poster up there. So, but I'll make sure to put a link in. But yeah, we'll try to get the third camera working next time. But yeah, we hope this was helpful to the people watching, and please, if there's a topic you want us to address, you can just make a comment or something, and we can kind of filter through those, and maybe it'll make it onto one of our episodes. And so
maybe
yeah, so feel free to do that, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will see you back here next time.
Thank you.